then, our floor pan, just a reminder, the kit instructions give you a couple of options. Where are we? Yeah, it tells you that you can paint it either as wood or grey. You can see here, E or N. So I've decided to paint it wood and then paint it grey and then scuff off where footfall will be, which I think will give it a nice little effect. So with that in mind, it's been primed in white. We've painted it in, I think I used New Wood by the Migamo colour. And then it's been given a coat of Vallejo gloss varnish just to seal it all, so that we can put some oil on it. But we're not going to use tube oil, we are going to use oil brushes for that job. So we're going to do the wood effect with oil brushes. Now, if you've been watching my go to build recently, I'm going to use exactly the same process. If you haven't, or you're coming to this video at some point in the future, and it's been there for a little while, then we're basically, what we're going to do is we're going to use oil brushes to put the wood grain in, and then we'll tint it and seal it, and we might do more wood grain or we might not, but let's just see how we get on. Okay, so the two oil brushes that we're going to have a play with are ochre and earth, and then we're going to use a little bit of packing sponge to get our wood grain effect. It's very, very quick, it's very, very easy, and it dries a lot quicker than using tube oil paint. It's a bit less messy, and you can airbrush a varnish over the top and seal it with, say, 15 minutes or so, and you can crack on. So it's a lot more convenient than the traditional tube oil method. So what we're going to do, we're going to do all of this as wood grain. Haven't decided what direction. I'll have a think about that while we're putting this on. And what we basically do is we dab it on. Bearing in mind that some of this will get covered up, but I'm not exactly sure exactly where. And I want to try and get a sort of this all mixes up as you put the wood grain in, but I want it to be a fairly light wood, so I'm putting the ochre in to sort of keep things light, and it'll just, you can mix these up as much as you want. You can put dark mud in if you want a darker colour. You could just go with one oil brush of colour. It's totally up to you. I think it's going to make sense to go that way. Probably these would have been separate boards, but I'm going to imagine that the joins for those separate boards would be under the main chair and bench that go here, and then possibly we'll put a join in there, but I'm not even sure you'd see that. So here we go, just dragging it down. I'm not pressing on, I'm literally just dragging it over the top, and you can see that's already starting the process. Now, because it's an oil brusher, you do have some time to play. Right, we're going to need a little bit more, I think. What you have to remember is, as you're using the sponge, you're effectively wiping it off. So you do need a fair amount of it. Doesn't matter if we get it on other bits because they can be painted in afterwards. Okay, that's probably a little bit too light, so I'm gonna get another one. I'm gonna put a little bit of dark mud in the mix. See if that helps a little bit. It's just not quite giving me the grain definition I'm looking for. There we go. And you just keep working at it until you've got something that you're happy with. And then once you've got the grain direction and colour and what have you looking the way you want it, that's when we can do some more funky stuff with it. Okay. Right, so what you can then do is take an old flat brush. Let me find one, there we go. This is a stippling brush which has really coarse splayed out hairs, and it's ideal for shaping grains. So what we can do is we can put shakes and weaves in, especially around areas where we might want to have put a knot in or something. So okay, that's getting there, isn't it? So this is the space where people are going to be walking in. I'm going to, just this bit here looks a little bit patchy, and you just keep working at it until you're happy it's looking the way you want it to look. And if you're unhappy with it, you can wipe it off for a little bit of white spirit and you can get rid of it. There we go. Right, so I'm going to leave that to dry, and then when that's dry we can tint it. Right, I need to paint in the exhaust system. I'm going to use rust tracks for this. It's MiG 34. It's quite a nice rusty colour. But then when we get to the manifold, we're going to use old rust. It's just that bit darker. And then we're going to use shadow rust, which is darker again, to do a little bit of shadow. So that's the plan. So let's start with rusty tracks. Okay, cleaning up these hoses could be a little bit daunting for some people, I suspect. What we're going to do is we're going to remove the 3 tabs, and when we put this on the model it's going to be face down, but we have seam to clean up, that's easy enough, and then we have a slight step, the full length there. Now it is all aligned, you've got, but it's just the way it's been moulded, and the the little grooves don't line up. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to go around cleaning that up. So I'm going to do the top and show you what I'm going to do. So basically, very fine side of the emery board, or a fine sanding stick of your choice. I'm just going to skim along the top and get rid of that step. There you go. A little bit more just there. When you're happy that the step is gone, then what you want to do is just get a razor saw and it's just one little simple swipe in each groove, because you'll have mould seam in the groove as well, and that could become visible when you put paint on it. Right, last little task to sort this out is just then run some liquid poly over it. That gets rid of any fluffy plastic debris, and we now have a pretty smart looking hose, and that took no time at all. It's not a big job, and we can slap some paint on that and you'd never know. Time to paint these hoses up. The centre part of the hose, which I'm guessing was some form of rubber, the instructions are calling for RLM02, so I'm using MIG 217, which is RLM02 green slate, which seems a bit of an odd colour for them really, but maybe I don't know. I think I was just assuming that there would be some form of black or dark grey, so these will contrast quite nicely on the little black footsteps where they get mounted. And then we'll be painting the ends in steel. Right, we can finish building up the engine area now. So now this has all been painted. We've painted the steel on the two items that need to be done, and I've just put the radiator in place. Now I had a bit of a fight with it. The fan that should go inside the casing is oversized. Doesn't want to fit in. So what I've done, because ultimately this won't get seen because it's all going to get covered up, what I wanted to do is get this perfectly straight, so it's not going to interfere with the radiator when we put that on later. So I've just bent one of the fins of the fan backwards a little bit, not too much, but it is no longer straight, and that's allowed me to straighten this up. Now when I look at the engine, it's actually got a bit of a slope on it, but it's all touching its mounting, so that must be correct. But what it does is it makes the fan sort of stick out at an angle, and it's the bottom of the fan that's just catching a little bit. So yeah, but I have now got it in the place I want it. So what we're going to do is get that glued in. So I do really love this micro brush that you get with the Plastic Magic. It is magic. Right, so that is that glued in. And then we've got two hoses. A short one that goes at the top from there to, hard to tell, but it looks like it's supposed to sit on the top of that. So let's just have a look at that. So we'll just get some glue on there, which will melt the plastic a little bit, get it tacky. Give it a sec. And then we'll put some more on. That will then sit on the surface. Okay, that's one on. Now this has a little mounting slot. As I suspected, trying to get the peg into the hole is going to be problematic, so we'll just take it off and then we can just line it up by eye. Yeah, there's something wrong here because that is nowhere near where it needs to meet. It's a country mile away. So that is supposed to terminate on there. Not a canal's chance. And it suggests that the fan should then be fully in the recess, which I suspect would be correct, but the fan's oversized, so that won't go in. I think what we'll do is we'll let the glue dry on this top hose, and then we'll have a go at super gluing it in. But yeah, this is being pushed back by this fan. So if you're building this and you're intending to show the engine, which I am not, then you really want to be modifying this fan, because it's a good 1.5 millimeters to that side. It just doesn't quite line up somehow. And I might be, and you know, it's correctly on its mounting point, so it is a little error in the kit, I think. But it could be I've got something not on centre, but I don't think I have. Yeah, the whole thing is struggling because of this fan. And I can't quite get that hose to meet. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it like that, and then when we come to build the bonnet up around it and put the front grille in, the radiator grille, I suspect we'll be able to sort of just push it into place. So hoses, I don't want to do the hoses black. It's suggested in the instructions that they're the same black as everything else. But I think we'll do them in a dark grey just for a bit of contrast. So I've just painted in the hoses using dark sea grey, and we need to paint the timing belt in as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a spot of black to that. They're both Model Airs, so I've not thinned these other than I dampened my brush in a bit of water, which I'm going to do again so we can mix it. And that just darkens it up, and it just means we've got different colours in there. Now, I'm not particularly planning on showing this engine off, so I'm really just doing this for you, for the benefit of those of you watching that might be planning to do the engine. It's just nice to have some contrast in there. So the instructions are telling us to do everything black, but by the time you weather it and stuff, it'll look different anyway. But it's just nice to make things stand out and pop out by being a slightly different colour. And then, of course, you can do the same again with some varnishes. Because it's a fire engine, and strictly speaking, it's sort of post-war, I'd expect it to be fairly well maintained. So when this gets weathered, it should be weathered sympathetic to that. So yeah, you're never going to have a spotlessly clean engine. There's your start point. But you know, they will have done things like any spilled oil and stuff like that will be cleaned up, because they're going to places where it's hot. And maintenance of the vehicle was important to make sure they could get there. So you've got to remember it'll be well maintained, which also means it'll be stripped down a lot and that sort of thing. So that allows you to do, you know, chipping. It can be clean but still have lots of chipping. So it's just thinking through that process, isn't it? Okay. And as always, when you're detail painting, check all your angles, make sure that everything's good. I'm actually painting this with my left hand so that I can see. I don't do that very often. There we go. Right, so that does that bit for now. And as you can see, we end up with a few different colours on the engine. Just got to touch the top of that up. Right, okay. The next job then, I think, is let all that dry off and let's return to the floor pan. Okay, last night this was given some wood graining, and now I want to seal it all in. The fact that it was left overnight isn't really relevant. About 15 minutes or so, I generally leave it just to harden before we start handling it again. So with the oil brushes, they dry fairly quickly. So what we're going to do is just going to give it a quick coat of matte acrylic varnish ahead of doing chipping and painting. You can thin this with water, so I have my pipette for water. Turn it around. That makes more sense, doesn't it? It's a W, not an M. So I mark up all my pipettes so that I don't mix them up and cross-contaminate them. Otherwise, you're pretty much at risk of mixing things up. And I know a lot of people use them once and chuck them away. This is just a way of reusing them over and over again. So I just write on them what they are. I've got a bunch of them and they're all marked up for different things. So, you know, I've got Humbrol there and Tamiya lacquer and so on. So as long as you mark them up, it's not a problem. So yeah, and that's my one for water. So although you can spray this neat, I find I prefer it thinned down a little bit, and I don't need much, and as always I put too much in, but you can see it's just a little bit too thick for my liking. So just going to thin it a little bit. and by thinning it, not only will it flow through the airbrush easier, it'll also be easier to clean out of the airbrush as well. There you go. It's still fairly thick, isn't it? So, got the airbrush. We've swapped our paint cap to the micro ones because we're only using a few drops. I'm just going to wipe a little bit into the paint pot there. Let's just help it go down because it's a bit slow running. Okay, so that is a small amount in the airbrush, which is all we pretty much need. So just check that everything is finger tight. Quite often, if you get bubbles blowing back in there, it's quite often that this bit isn't tight. Okay, now I've got a regulator on this in line, and I just want to make sure that that is open. So you can hear when the regulator is closed down. Listen to the difference in the sound. If I close that down now fully, you can hardly hear that. Now listen as I turn it up. We're just pressing air only here. So you've got loads of control with that regulator. So I've got a 0.4 needle in, and that should give me a nice bit of blast. So I'm just going to... There we go, it's flowing through. I'm going to start at this top end because then I can handle it with that later on. We're just using the light. You can see it sort of go a bit matte as it goes on, and that's helping me understand where I am. Okay. So I'm going to leave that about 4 hours to fully harden before I want to go in with chipping fluid. If we were doing this as a top coat, then we'd give it a second coat, but this is just a seal, so I'm quite happy with just the one. So we'll put that to one side and we'll clean our airbrush. So because we're using a water-based product, one of the things we can quickly do is shove some water through rather than going straight for cleaning products. Trouble with cleaning products is they cost money. Right, I'm just going to lay down a little bit of primer on some areas we'll be working on sort of next in the build. I tend to use Ultimate Primer, which my understanding is it's basically rebottled one shot. And what I find with it is as it gets a little bit older, it tends to thicken up a little bit. So I use Ultimate Thinner to thin it down a little bit. Seems to work quite well. So you don't need to put much in. It's really a case of depends on how much it's thickened up really, and how long you've had your primer. So you know, this is going to go through an airbrush with a number 4 needle on it. But you can see I've added just a couple of tiny drops to that, and it's made all the difference. So even though it says doesn't require thinning, it's always worth, in my view, putting anything that you're going to put through the airbrush in a palette first, so you can understand the viscosity and whether you need to thin it before you put it in your airbrush. Now, I'm not saying you can't mix it in the airbrush, because obviously you can. I prefer not to. I think there's all sorts of reasons why not. If you've got dried lumps or something like that in your paint, you're going to spot it before you chuck it in your airbrush, and cause it to have to be stripped down. So yeah, it's just personal preference really. There we go. We don't need a lot, so I've got my micro paint cup on. Let's see how that's doing. Yeah, that's coming out nicely. So the trick is thin layers, keep it moving, build up your colour. It's only a primer, so you have an opportunity to put some unevenness in, a bit of modulation in. So if you don't go full on open and spray it like you're spray painting a real car or something, you just go on, build up the layers. And that gives you lots of opportunity to get any effects that you might want right from the start. So yeah, it's worth doing it on a smaller opening, just to pull your finger back a little bit and allow a small amount of paint to come through, and then that you keep control of it, and that works well. And you can see that, you know, I've been able to control it sufficiently that we've not got much in the way of overlap onto the white primer here. Right, time to have a little bit of fun with this. So our matte varnish has dried on our oil brush or wood effect, so that's all nicely sealed now. So the next thing we want to do is put the chipping fluid on. So just to remind you, the plan is that in the areas where we're going to see a bit of traffic, we want to have the paint scuffed off the wooden floor. So where we've got these little markers, we know we've got seats and bulkheads and things. So it's this area here and this area here where we're going to get the traffic, and then in the two footwells. So I'm using Vallejo chipping medium. It's water-based, which is how the chipping process works. And what we're basically going to do, I always shake things, I don't know why, I don't need to shake it. What we're basically going to do is put a few drops in our palette. And you can see it's quite thick and gloopy. And then I'm going to use this stippling brush because it's got a nice thick, sprayed out, uneven bristles, which is ideal for this task. And we don't want to paint it on because what we want is lots of little spots and things like that. So when we are stripping it back off, it comes off in a pattern that sort of looks authentic. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by giving it a little bit all over, and then we'll go and give it a second round where we want heavier traffic. That's generally how I've done it in the past. And we're going to use a sort of stabbing motion, which will allow us to have it uneven. If you paint it on, it'll just peel off in a big load, which probably isn't what we want. So there you go, you can see it's on there. We're going to leave that to dry, and that's it. It's as simple as that. Then we'll paint over it and we should be able to then strip that back off. And if we don't like it, we then just paint over it again. Okay, while our chipping fluid is drying on our floor there, I want to have a look at these two steps, 20 and 21. So we've already built up those two. The front seats, the driver's seats, need some clean up. There's some seams and things to sort out, whereas the bench we've got painted up with our primers. So that's in a good condition. This we've not looked at all, and neither have we the controls. So we need to get all those parts out, and then we can clean them all up along with this and get them ready for this stage here. Now we have primed those in grey because they're painted black and they need to be painted up before they go on there, and we'll have to mask them later on. We can also clean up these parts for the inside the engine bay, and we've got these two bulkheads here, which again I've also primed, so we can get all of this ready to go. So let's do that. Now just a little tip when you're cleaning up small parts like this, and this needs quite a bit of cleaning up on all sides, I leave it on the sprue because it's just that much easier to hold it, clean up the three sides that I can, and then remove it. So I've only got to clean up one side without having too much of the part to hold. So it's a good way of doing it for me. It just makes life a little bit easier. So we can do that on that, and we'll do it also on these pedals here. We can just take the seams off these edges and the top of the pedal whilst it's still fairly secured, and then we've only got to worry about that one side then, haven't we? Well, that is all the cleanup done on those parts, and whilst we were doing all that, our chipping medium has dried, and you can just see that in the light. So I am ready for painting that, which if we're painting it, it's going to be N, which is this grey. It's like a very pale grey colour, but it's also the same colour that's getting used on these bulkheads here and these bits on the seat here. So it seems to me like the best place to start next, or carry on with, is to do the painting of that pale grey, because some of these fittings are then going on top, and they may be different colours. It's not really telling me what colours to do them, to be honest. It is with the dashboard. It's saying wood or N. I quite like the idea of it being wood, and maybe we'd paint the centre bit, but there is no paint being called out for things like the pedals, the steering wheel and column, or the handbrake, gear shift, and whatever that is. So it looks like some form of filler cap, to be honest. So I think a little bit of reference work needs to be done on the cockpit on the driver's cabin. So we'll do that. We've also got to paint the inside of this in our N colour as well, and then that goes in there like that. Although quite how I'm not. Oh, there like that. So we're going to have to put the glass in and mask the glass. So we've got some little bits to do before we paint. I want to glue the glass in and mask it. So that's probably the next job. And then we can think about painting this up and a little bit of research to do. So I'm going to go away and do the research. Then we'll have a look at masking up the glass and getting that fixed in place. There is no like seal or anything like that on this clear part. It's just a completely flat clear part. So we can pop that in, glue that into place, and I think mask it afterwards. I'm just checking the fit now. Found some very good colour photographs of a non-restored version of one of these, which has some an inside shot of the driver's cabin. So you just need the tiniest amount of glue to hold this in place. And you don't really need to glue in at the sides, we're just gluing it in at the top and the bottom there. And you saw that what I did was, once I took the brush out, I wiped it on the side and took most of the glue off, and then we're just touching right at the top so that it capillaries in. That'll be enough to hold it in. And then what we can do when that's nice and dry is we can mask that area off, which is slightly recessed because it's sat inside, and then we'll mask that bit off on the inside as well, so we can spray away happily, and then we take the inside mask off when we build up the insides, and we'll leave the outside one on until the end of the build. That's the plan. Of parts we can glue onto the inside of this engine firewall. We've got a horn there, and not quite sure what that is, but it looks like it's got a cap on it, so it's some form of bottle we can fill up or something like that. Could be the washer bottle for the windscreen or something. You know what, I don't even know if they had such things. I'm guessing they did. It's a nice tight fit. And then we've got this horn which sits on top there like that. I'm going to have to hold that in place while we glue it. There we go. Right, we can let all that dry for a minute. Now these two parts, one mounts on the other and then it gets put inside the driver's cab on the floor. So we might as well glue that in while we're at it. It just becomes easier to paint as a sub-assembly. Okay, right, time to get the paint down on this floor pan, covering up our chip-in fluids, and this is the same colour that we'll be using throughout the interior, so we can do some other parts while we're at it. Having a look at some reference pictures, and all of these small parts are black. Anything metal is semi-gloss black, and then you've got some variations depending on the material of matte blacks, very dark greys and so on. So we can have a little bit of a play with different effects with this lot just to bring that to life. Having had a look, it looks like this is most likely to have been a dark reddy wood colour with a black panel. So that's what I'm going to do. There's one or two things we can pick out in different colours. There would have been some little fasteners, so we might emulate that if we can. Little silver fastener heads. So that should look quite good when done. So that'll look quite different, contrasting to the pale grey that we're using with the red wood in there. That'll look really quite nice. So that's the process for that. So the next thing we're going to do is paint all of those in black. It's time to get the chip-in fluid off this floor and see how it turns out. If we don't like it, we can sand it all off and paint it up again. But I think it's going to look quite cool if we can pull off the wood underneath the paint here. So got fairly stiff paintbrush here, and it's got a paintbrush, toothbrush, and it's got little rubber bits in it and stuff, and it's quite a hard bristle one, and we're just dipping it in a bit of water, and we're going to rub away. There we go. And you can see that's just taking that right back down. That's really good. I'll just there we go, we can see the effect. That looks nice and worn, doesn't it? Now you might be seeing a little bit of brown colour. That's because this is the brush I use for weathering, but I don't mind on the floor pan because it's just adding grime that we're going to be adding anyway. There we go. I'm just looking at it, making sure. If you can see bumps in it, then that's areas you've not done yet. That is it done. So let's dry that off. That, I think, looks pretty good. That's what I was trying to achieve. We've got the wood effect that you can see underneath. We've got the chipping of the worn away of the paint on the floor. I am very happy with that. I've got to say that could not have gone better. So we will leave that to dry. Just making sure we've got all the chipping fluid off. We don't want dried lumps on. There we go. So I will leave that to dry, and then we're able to paint the underneath, which we're going to do in black. I'll brush paint that, and then we can mount it on the chassis and start building up. So yeah, happy with that.
you.